Before starting this video, I just want to let you know that AMD kind of played safe with the gaming results that they've shown for the 9800 X3D. So we're not only going to have some very interesting results in terms of gaming and productivity, but also lower temperatures than the 7800 X3D. Which is a win-win situation, like today's sponsor,
GVG Mall!
Bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. Now, to give you some perspective of the things and parts that I used, I want to thank AMD for sending the Ryzen 7 9800 X3D, of course, an ASRock X870 Taichi, and the 32GB G-Skill kit that I used in this video, as can be seen. And they also sent a Samsung NVMe with the Windows version that they used for testing. And I thought it would be Windows 11 24/2, but no, as soon as I installed the NVMe disk, I found out that they were using Windows 11 23/2, so I cleaned that up and installed the 24/2 in order to have all CPUs tested with the same Windows version, of course. And by the way, in terms of RAM kits, they are different, of course, but all the timings and subtimings are set manually, meaning that even though they're different, they're the same, since the timings and subtimings, once again, are set manually to have the most stable results possible. Okay. As for the 9800 X3D improvements, it brings all the bells and whistles the Zen 5 brings, like the TSMC 4nm lithography, double bandwidth for the AVX 512 instructions, and all those things. But what really makes the CPU different is the 3D cache. Because previously it was put on top of the CCD, which is where the cores are, meaning that the cores had to pass the heat through the cache and then to the IHS. But now AMD changed the 3D cache to the bottom of the CCD, meaning that the CCD is now closer to the IHS, making it way easier to cool. As you can see passing now on the screen, I have a classic Noctua D15S or something like that, with only one fan, and I'm still able to game with the 9800 X3D at low temperatures. And even if we go to more CPU demanding games, I can still have it perform very well with this cooler, with ambient temperatures of around 21 degrees, which was impossible for the 7800 X3D. That would make my Noctua just ramp up the fan speeds all the time, so kind of And moving the 3D cache to the bottom not only allowed AMD to increase the frequencies, of course, but also the power limits, which also led to the official unlocked overclocking, which is one of those things that we could do with the previous chips as well using Curve Optimizer, but it wasn't officially supported. But well, now that you know a bit of what's changed, let's go to the benchmarks. Starting with the productivity benchmarks, we have Photoshop with budget benchmark, and this test uses the CPU a lot more than Premiere, as Premiere uses both CPU and GPU. Here the 7800 X3D was only 12% faster than the 5800 X3D, which was kind of a minimal difference, but the 9800 X3D is 23% faster than the 7800 X3D, making it also 38% faster than the 5800 X3D. And as stated before, Premiere isn't really that CPU demanding and is more like a mixed workload in between CPU and GPU, with the 7800 X3D being a mere 9% faster than the 5800 X3D, but with the 9800 X3D being 12% faster than the 7800 X3D, making it also 22% faster than the 5800 X3D. And if you thought the differences were big, look at Blender, where the 9800 X3D absolutely murders the 7800 X3D, being 29% faster with the same exact settings and the same exact RAM kit, making it also a whopping 64% faster than the 5800 X3D, making it like a huge upgrade for people using the CPU for Blender, of course. Cinebench also shows us some very good results for the 9800 X3D that is now 30% faster than the 7800 X3D in multi-core and 18% faster in single-core, which again is a considerably higher difference, than what AMD was showing. And it gets even better as we go into AI with the Procyon computer vision benchmark that is mostly about machine learning. And while the 7800 X3D was barely faster than the previous X3D CPU, the 9800 X3D is 40% faster than the 7800 X3D, which is insane. This also makes me think that AMD could be doing some interesting stuff with FSR4, like if you have an AMD CPU and GPU, the processing could be done or happening in both at the same time, making the cost of upscaling and frame generation much lower. And that would be awesome. And to finalize the productivity benchmarks, we have compression and decompression with 7-zip, which shows improvements as well, but nothing really relevant. Still, the 9800 X3D presents a 16% improvement in decompression and 17% in compression compared to the previous generation, which is acceptable, I guess. Now the part that most of you wanted to see, and we start with Assetto Corsa, where we already have a massive performance uplift. If we think that the 7800 X3D was already the golden standard for gaming, we have the 9800 X3D pushing things even further, being up to 23% faster than the 7800 X3D and 54% faster than the 5800 X3D, giving people an actual good reason to move past the 5800 X3D and the AM4 platform. The Witcher 3 is one of the benchmarks that I just added since people were always asking for it, testing in Novigrad, one of the most CPU intensive, if not the most CPU intensive city in the game. And once again the 9800 X3D just does a phenomenal job. In this game the 7800 X3D was already 24% faster than the previous generation, and I believe that's mostly due to moving to DDR5. But the 9800 X3D is 16% faster than the 7800 X3D with the same exact memory, and even if you don't care about averages at all, you have the smoother gameplay with considerably higher 1% lows. Counter-Strike 2 also had a significant uplift, and this means that if you have a 9800 X3D, you can kill your opponent 15% faster than those peasants with the 7800 X3D, or die 39% faster to the casual player with the 5800 X3D that you can't stop dying to. Overall, the 9800 X3D doesn't really make a huge difference here, but definitely makes it the most powerful CPU in the world for Counter-Strike 2. And Hogwarts Legacy isn't much different. I believe I should have tested it here with high settings or with FSR, as the 9800 X3D was being GPU bottlenecked in like 50% of the benchmark, which makes it look slower than it actually is. In this case, only 7% faster than the 7800 X3D, but again, when I retest these CPUs, I'll be using a stronger GPU, so it will be fine, I guess. As for Microsoft Flight Simulator, I can say that testing it in the same exact part as I did before granted me lower results, and I believe this is due to the game's updates, plus the changing to Windows 11 24/2. Here we have the 7800 X3D performing 15% better than the previous generation, and the 9800 X3D 20% better than the 7800 X3D, raising the bar over the previous generation once more. If you're considering upgrading from your 5800 X3D, for example, you now know that the 9800 X3D delivers 13% higher 1% lows than the 5800 X3D does in the averages. That's how insane the CPU is. And Banishers Ghosts of New Eden is another game that I enjoyed a lot. It uses Unreal Engine 5 and is mostly GPU bound, but when you come to the bigger towns it gets really CPU demanding, and this is where the faster CPUs shine, with the 9800 X3D being 19% faster than the 7800 X3D that was already 24% faster than the 5800 X3D. This means that if you have a capable enough GPU or if you are using FSR to get more FPS, going from the 5800 X3D to the 9800 X3D would make you go from 126 to 190 FPS with the same GPU. And remember back then in the productivity tasks where we had the 9800X3D murdering the other two CPUs? Well, Hitman 3 is a very demanding game CPU-wise too, and that's why the 9800X3D is 25% faster than the 7800X3D that was barely faster than the 5800X3D. And again, even if you don't really care about those high average FPS, the difference in the 1% lows is already worth it, going from the usual mid-70s with the other two CPUs to 102 FPS with the 9800X3D, a 33% increase. Homeworld 3 is another new addition to the benchmark suite, as it is really CPU intensive when the galactic battles start. Here we see the 7800X3D being 24% faster than the previous generation, which is already okay, but still delivering 1% lows below the 60 average FPS mark. Below the 60 FPS mark, sorry. I mean, 55 FPS is okayish, kind of okayish, but if we look at the 9800X3D, we have it being only 16% faster than the 7800X3D, but delivering 22% higher 1% lows, pushing the numbers from 55 to 67 FPS. A much more enjoyable experience if you ask me. And as we move to The Last of Us, I finally managed to hit a GPU bottleneck most of the time with the 9800X3D, something that was, well, at least that almost never happened before. Here the 9800X3D is only 6% faster than the 7800X3D, once again due to the GPU bottleneck, but if you look at the 1% lows, and in case you don't know, the closer the 1% lows are to the averages, the smoother the gameplay will be, we have a 20% increase, meaning your gameplay will be considerably smoother with a new AMD CPU. And Far Cry 6 is about the same. We finally have a CPU that is able to make the GPU bottleneck happen in this game, even though we were using ultra settings and ray tracing. That's how CPU driven this game is. Here the 9800X3D was only 6% faster than the 7800X3D due to the GPU bottleneck once again, but with 18% higher 1% lows, bringing a smoother gameplay experience of course. And by the way, the 9800X3D here, even with the GPU bottleneck of course, is 29% faster than the 5800X3D, which already performs very well in this game. Cyberpunk 2077 is also a new addition, but now testing in the middle of the city with crowd density set to high to really push the CPUs. And again, the difference is big, with the 7800X3D being 25% faster than the previous generation, which is actually a good difference for a single generation, and the 9800X3D being 16% faster than the 7800X3D. 20% if we count with the curve optimizer with plus 100 MHz of course. It might not seem much, but people willing to pay for the 9800X3D, the difference will be noticeable in terms of overall FPS numbers and smoothness. Spider-Man Remastered, according to AMD's reviewers guide, was having massive issues with the 9800X3D, of course, making it perform really poor, even when compared to the 5800X3D for example, although AMD was testing it with Windows 11 23/2, while I tested it with Windows 11 24/2, and my results were quite different. With the 7800X3D being barely faster than the 5800X3D, delivering way higher 1% lows though, but with the 9800X3D not only performing well, but also 15% faster than the 7800X3D on average, and most importantly, 26% better in the 1% lows. And by the way, sorry about stuttering with the X3D, but this is really hard for me as my native language is Portuguese of course. But it doesn't really stop here, and now we have the ray tracing results, and somehow the 7800X3D is slower than the 5800X3D here. And you might think there are some issues, but I tested this before and the 7800X3D was only on par with the 5800X3D months ago as well, so this is kind of normal I guess. As for the 9800X3D, we have a mild uplift in the 1% lows as well, with a 21% increase in the averages, making me think once again there was something wrong with these chipset drivers mixed with Windows 11 23/2. Getting closer to the final line, we have Plague Tale Requiem, tested now in the city areas as well, and this is another game where I need to start testing it maybe with quality mode instead of ultra quality in order to push the CPU a bit more, because as you can see, both the 9800X 3D and 7800X 3D are hitting a GPU bottleneck at around 174 FPS, which is way more than 99% of players worldwide will aim at, of course. Looking at it from another perspective, for this game, even a 5800X 3D will do an outstanding job, delivering over 150 average FPS in the more populated areas of the game, which are also, well, the heavier ones. And the final game is also a new addition, Need for Speed Unbound, and I really like this game for CPU testing as it uses the Frostbite engine, so you can kind of look at these results and see what the difference would be with other EA games, like Battlefield for example. And I was blown away when I saw the 9800X 3D pushing almost 300 FPS in the same part where I saw most of the 9000 series CPUs pushing around 180, and that blew my mind. And again, almost no one needs such a higher number, of course, but this shows how much CPU power you can get from this new generation, especially to achieve a smoother gameplay. In this case, the 7800X 3D was already 23% faster than the 5800X 3D, and the 9800X 3D pushes the difference to another 17%. Very good performance here. And as for the average FPS, we have the results being considerably higher than what AMD said it would be. AMD stated it would be on average 8% in gaming, 8% better in gaming of course, with around 20% in some games, and it seems the results were very real as they tested most of games in a GPU bottleneck scenario. And the ones showing around 20% increase were confirmed here to deliver those same 20%, in some cases even more. So overall we saw our 9800X 3D performing on average 15% better than the 7800X 3D in terms of gaming with the same RAM configuration, and 36% better than the 5800X 3D, which in my opinion makes it a worthy upgrade path for the 5800X 3D users, at least if you really want those higher frame rates or smoother gameplay. And finishing with the power draw tests, we have the 7800X 3D being exceptional in that scenario, as it brought around the same power draw in idle and single core as the 5800X 3D, while also delivering lower multi-core power draw. The 9800X 3D also brings around the same idle and single core power draw as the 7800X 3D, which is actually quite nice, but consumes 41 watts more in multi-core. But honestly, to me, it doesn't really matter. It does consume more power in multi-core of course, but it isn't only quite faster, as it is also way cooler than the 7800X 3D, due to now having the 3D cache not on top, but in the bottom of the cores, which makes it of course way easier to cool. And if you want to talk about official overclocking support, I don't really think it is worth it, especially for gaming. I only did a mild plus 100 MHz with curve optimizer set to -15, and even then the multi-core power draw went up to 150 watts while delivering a slight performance increase. But let's talk a bit more about that in the conclusion. So as you've seen, the CPU not only performs better or considerably better depending on the benchmark, gaming, productivity, whatever, but it also is way easier to cool off, meaning that you don't really need to have a top-of-the-line cooler anymore just to cool off your CPU. I mean, even with my NRMax 360mm AIO cooler, that is considerably better than the Noctua air cooler on my main build, as soon as I run a CPU-heavier game, yeah, the 7800X 3D jumps to around 70-75 degrees, and again with a much better CPU cooler and higher fan noise, while the 9800X 3D on a decent air cooler is able to maintain much lower temperatures overall. And in a matter of fact, that's one of the main reasons I never had an X3D CPU on my main build, because I really like air coolers and I absolutely dislike the noise. So having the CPU fan just ramping up and down all the time because of the CPU is a big nope for me. But gladly, I can now have the 9800X 3D there, and it performs very well with really low noise levels, which is great. So we have a CPU with around the same MSRP as the 7800X 3D, but with better performance in gaming, much better performance in productivity, and way easier to cool. putting it on the upgrade path for most people, but especially for people, let's say, with a 5700 X3D, people with the 5800 X3D, and even people that have the money to spend and they want the absolute best. They can go even from the 7800 X3D to the 9800 X3D, sorry, because even though the performance increase is around like 15% in most scenarios, I mean, in terms of productivity, it is way better, and in terms of cooling alone, it is way easier to cool as well. So it's a win-win situation, once again, if you have the money to spend. If you're still on the AM4 platform with an AM4 CPU like the 5600X, let's say, or even an Intel CPU like the 12600K and so on, if you just want to have a better performance system and you really want to go into AM5, yes, the 9800 X3D is definitely the way to go if you have the money to buy it. Otherwise, you can go with cheaper parts like the 7800 X3D, or, I mean, if your GPU just isn't powerful enough, just stay with the M4 and upgrade to the 5700 X3D, which is the best price performance CPU that you can get right now. Of course, on AM4. And well guys, I guess that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video, as that really helps a lot. And as usual, yeah, I really enjoyed making this video and more videos will come. I will also compare it to the 9700X to see how it performs, productivity, gaming wise and so on. But in terms of the gaming performance that we've got, yeah, the 9800 X3D is much more than what AMD said it would be. It performs really better in some case scenarios, and at the same time, once again, way easier to cool. It does consume a bit more power in multi-core, but that's about it. Everything performance-wise, it's a win-win situation. So should you get it or not? Well, if you have the money to upgrade, big yes. If you are still on AM4 and want to upgrade to a better CPU, big yes. It is better to spend a bit more and get the 9800 X3D compared to other 9000 series CPUs. We're still gonna wait for the 9900 X3D and the 9950 X3D, as they are set to bring cache on both CCDs instead of just one, so in terms of gaming performance that can actually be very interesting. But well, for now, for the price that it is, definitely big yes. Once again, thank you very much for watching and see you in the next video, guys. Leave your comment in the comment section and let me know what you thought about the benchmarks, what you thought about the video, the editing, the noise, the echo. Just let me know in the comment section, and let me know if you are going to buy a 9800 X3D or not, and if you thought it would be better or worse. See you in the comment section, I guess. Cheers.